Hello everyone, and happy Venus retrograde. Venus today went retrograde. Venus is in Gemini and is squaring Neptune. So we want to just talk about this phenomena, what's happening, what it represents within consciousness. And I'll start off with just some ideas and really introducing this Venus retrograde archetype and the core themes that I see it. And Michelle will share some of her thoughts too. First, whenever you look at Venus moving retrograde, we have to understand what's happening. So the Venusian function itself speaks to our relationship to the physical world, the physical sense. It's how we internalize a sense of value and worth. Venus corresponds to our feeling body, our senses. It also speaks to the relationships that we bring into our life and how all of our relationships are a journey of learning balance and harmony and getting needs met and learning how to give and share. One of the core issues with Venus is this issue of commodification, where we can associate value and esteem and worth to the people and the objects of our life. So what happens there is our sense of value and self-esteem and self-worth, where we derive pleasure, becomes associated with the objects that make us feel good, the people that make us feel good, and thus it associates with the most gross materialistic level of consciousness within Venus, which is I'm going to pursue and in a sense possess and commodify according to my own interest that which makes me feel pleasure, and I'm going to avoid and resist and simply ignore, deny, push away that which causes me discomfort. The unconscious instinctive impulse towards pleasure, seeking pleasure and there you go, it's comfortable. Seeking pleasure and avoiding discomfort is that comfortable? Mm-hmm. Okay. Is the most unconscious, that level of Venus. And wherever your Venus is in your chart, it can really manifest as manifesting in that way in our own life. So you can see your relationship to people, where might the psychology of self-interest and relating to the external world according to how people, places, and things serve me. In the same way, being commodified, right? I'm going to give myself or use myself in order to satisfy another person's values or another person's needs. The whole journey of self-respect, self-esteem, and self-worth is contained within the Venusian archetype. And there's a really important lesson within the Venus archetype, which is cultivating a relationship to our senses, to our present moment reality, beyond the instinctual impulse to pursue pleasure and avoid pain. This means developing the ability to feel and to be present and thus content with what's happening right now. The feeling and the contentment says, I'm going to embody and allow and notice what's arising, but without a state of either grabbing towards more of it or running away from it. There's this sense of relaxing into a state of grace, a psychology of grace. So Venus is also beauty, harmony, grace. In essence, life is art. And so learning how to be graceful, learning how to be relaxed, something that I'm always realizing in my life. And this is true when I practice Qigong as much as when I practice relationship, as much as when I work with medicine. Really, it's anything. When the sensation is uncomfortable and difficult, the instinctual Venusian impulse is, I'm not comfortable. So we actually resist it. We tighten up. And what happens is we close ourselves up from sensing. We're no longer feeling anymore. But to actually offer a gesture of relaxation and grace in the midst of discomfort. It's a little bit contrary to the conditioned mind and what we're used to doing. But this offering of grace says, this moment is enough. What I have is enough. Who I'm with is enough. what I'm experiencing right now is enough. And this just sort of becomes the foundation for true relationship. Because one of the issues with Venus is more. I need more. More senses, more pleasure, more relationship. I don't like the way you make me feel. Let me find someone else that makes me feel the way I want to feel. But even if it's uncomfortable, to cultivate this sense of enoughness. So enoughness coincides with the energy of grace and beauty and harmony and art. Like enoughness and all of those things go together. Like you can't have grace and beauty and harmony and pleasure and be grasping for more at the same time. It's antithetical to one another. So that's Venus in general, in a nutshell. When Venus goes retrograde, obviously, to me, as per anything retrograde, we're really tuning into that particular planetary function, revisiting it. It's like a rewinding of our conditioned patterns relative to that Venusian function. And so here it's connecting with a deeper thread of self-value, a self-worth, a gracefulness, a way of connecting with our feeling body that is less dependent on the objects and the people that we commodify. So Venus really retrograde really just takes us more into our internal experience. And it slows down the instinctual function. So what's happening with Venus retrograde in Gemini? It's such a trip. And this is like a trippy combination of planets. Very mutable, very existential. So Venus retrograde in Gemini, there's a certain security that we create for ourselves in grabbing onto thought and logic that will tell us the purpose and the place for everything and everyone in our life. And in creating this logically cohesive construct in our mind, it creates a sense of security. We can possess things. We can possess people. We can know what everything is for. We can have these expectations that seem completely logically sound. And the thing with Gemini, and it's such a head trip, is logic doesn't actually solve anything. It is, by itself, it doesn't solve anything. There's this principle where we can ask any question, create any thought, which will create a counter thought, which will create a counter thought. It's like the whole realm of logical constructs are created. They're not objectively true. Right? So if I wanted to logically convince myself why I need something, or why I need a person to be a certain way, or why I can't be with a person because of who they are, or why this won't work for me, or why I need this much money. I think actually about the story of Jonah. Are you familiar with that story? Mm-hmm. You know, so the general gist of it is, you know, this guy was given family and children and riches, and he was happy, and then he lost it all. All his children died, and he was mourning. And then at the end of the story, he got, you know, more children, more riches. But one of the teachings of the story is he was given all this stuff, and he was happy. And then he lost it, and he was like, God, why have you taken this? He was miserable. But it's so funny because, like, he wasn't miserable before he got all that stuff. It's like the mind had to create the thought. I had it, now I don't have it. And because I don't have it, I lost something that was mine. The mind creates possession through its logical constructs. It's such a trip. And it's so real. It's so alive in us that we show up in all of our relationships. And our relationships to food, to the body, to the earth, with these ideas about who you are, what it is, how it's going to work. And we think so long as we can make it make logical sense in our mind, that we can feel secure. We can depend on the value that these people and things are providing for us. And so one of the practices with Venus retrograde in Gemini is being able to distinguish between thought and feeling, thought and sensation. And so many of the thoughts and the conclusions that we create in life are actually moving on top of very subtle sensation, feelings that we're actually not willing to be present with because we don't have an answer to it. If I don't have an answer to my discomfort, Venus in Gemini will feel insecure. It wants a map. It wants something to hold on to so it knows how to directionally locate itself and identify itself. So without that map, without that logical answer that explains the what's and the hows and the wheres of everything and everyone, including yourself, there's just sensation. And Venus, it's spirit, circle, on top of cross, on matter. It's resting, it's embodied. This is where the grace is. So it's not about not using the mind, because Venus is in Gemini. But it's reworking, kind of clarifying and healing the gross identification with the mind and how we value it and use it as a way to disconnect from the present moment. And so what then happens is the logical order of creation itself, like how things are actually, because like what's Gemini? It's, you have a thought because you learn, like I picked up, this is a napkin. I learned this and I have a context for it. This is a single thought. And the more I grow, the more I learn, the more I communicate, the more I interact, the more context I have. And so I'm able to like understand, oh, napkins are associated with dinner. And you wipe your nose and your mouth with it and you put it on your lap. And you do that because food is falling. Like all the things that I'm saying are actually an amalgamation of many, many, many different thoughts that the mind has been able to associate together. So we're adding thoughts to thoughts to thoughts. We're adding data, information to existing frameworks of information that builds a more comprehensive superstructure of data and information in our mind, which allows us to feel like we can interact with the world, we feel more secure, we feel more able, we can exchange and learn. And so we can develop a more brilliant and clear logical appreciation for what's going on, how life is actually coming together. And what purpose the people and places and things in our life are actually serving when we're not relating to them purely from the instinctual impulse to make them what logically feels reasonable and sensible to us. And so a restful mind is incredibly important here. So we have Neptune squaring Venus too, and let's hear what you have to say about all of this and maybe talk about Neptune as well.
Yeah. I was thinking when you were talking about Venus retrograde that the one significant piece of this particular retrograde is that Venus conjuncted with Vesta just prior to stationing. And that idea that, where does the mind live? And in the body, in the sanctuary, but in what context do we see things and people and relationships in our life as beautiful? And when you were talking about this objectification, there's a predominant culture of making only very specific things, thoughts, people, beautiful. And this idea, though, that everything is sacred, that there isn't that, the flowers I'm looking at, some of them have already wilted and begun to die. And does that make them any less beautiful than they are? They are. They just are, because of the way that they're, the miracle of how they're created and how they came to be. And everything that it took, like when you think about a relationship that you have with a particular person, there's an infinite amount of information, experiences, and thoughts that it took for you to even get to that moment in time in being with that person, you know, and there to see the sacredness of the entire being, the entire thought, the entire person, as not separate from yourself or your own sacredness. Yeah. And did you want to talk about the Neptune square?
Sure. And that feels really connected to it. Wherever we have Neptune, we're dissolving our illusions. And so a big part of what this is, in my perception of this, take Venus and Gemini go retrograde in a very tight square with Neptune. It can feel, this can actually be hard, like devastating and confusing because it can feel like you don't know what's going on. It can feel like you can't make sense out of anything, and it's like grasping at straws to make logical sense. Neptune is always redirecting. Neptune is always redirecting our attention towards love, towards what is eternally true, and away from all the 1,000 things that we try to make meaningful. That the world has no meaning on its own. Nothing has no meaning. No person, no relationship, no body on its own. And when we make something its own God, like, oh, this is where ultimate meaning, this wonderful mug, everything becomes dross and empty and deeply futile, because that which we've given meaning, the logical construct that we have around that which is ultimately meaningful, can be broken so quickly. And like the person who you've said, this is who they are and they're amazing, they can shatter that so quickly. And you can shatter that so quickly. Like everything that we think we've gotten figured out is wrong. Like my dear friends Em and Amber have said, and I love this quote, it's spiritual awakening is a realization that you were wrong. Oof. I love it. It's so humbling. And just to say, oh, I'm wrong about everything I see. We're not usually willing to admit that. Like, I'm not wrong about everything I see. But we are. I don't think there's any accurate perception if love isn't the source of it. And to really examine that, to really reflect on that. Either love is the only reality, or love is the only reality except for a bunch of other realities. Like, you can't have both. And so Neptune, also, just a point of humble self-awareness, raise your hand if you feel a deep abiding joy and fulfillment and happiness and contentment in your own life. And of course, a completely 100% abiding state of that. None of us will raise our hands. And yet most of us will walk around with this air of certainty that we've kind of gotten all figured out. Even the premise of I don't got it figured out is its own kind of air of certainty. To really allow our minds to be completely reshaped and to give ourselves the gift of grace and present moment living and embodiment with what is, not be so quick to try to make things happen and conclude. I keep on learning that life has its own plan, its own directive, its own intention for unification, for unity, for healing, and that we're all a part of that. We're all, Gemini, interacting and making this web of connection and communication through all the things that we are to one another, and we don't have the full picture. So I think Neptune is just really this invitation to let go more deeply into trust and forgiveness. Forgiving what? Forgiving our thoughts, forgiving reality for not being what we decided it has to be. And also to question this, like, I need fill in the blank. I need whatever. Like, are you sure? Like, how do you know what you need? And so much of what we've established as a value is simply what we've become familiar with and comfortable. And there's a certain entitlement that comes, especially in Western cultures, where you can make a list of, this is who I want in a partner. This is, the ideal body that I want. This is like all these things. It's like, no, you don't get to decide. It doesn't work that way. You don't choose any of this stuff. Right? Your job is to uncover the love that you are and to forgive and to bring as much grace into every aspect of your life and to realize the gift and the perfection of what has been given to you, including your body, including every aspect of your life, and to have this prayerful relationship to contentment, which isn't holding this seemingly logically cohesive and well thought out idea of how things are supposed to be. So it could be very blissful and beautiful this time if we put in the work to really come into a deeper relationship to spirit in that way. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about Neptune in general. Going back to the idea of possession, and Neptune often relates to substance abuse and to addiction, and I'm coming to realize more and more that that's this path of our seeking the divine, seeking God, and a substance that then produces like euphoria or bliss initially, right? Any of the drugs that one might abuse, alcohol, cocaine, heroin, any substances, and we have an epidemic of opioid abuse in our country. Any of those substances, there's a moment in which it's like, feels so good. It feels so good, right? And then the mind immediately says, I want this good feeling again and again. And addiction steps in when we're no longer able to control the obsession of the mind to want that good feeling, even beyond the point to which the drug then begins to destroy the body and make one sick. And, it's incredibly painful to see what can happen in a state of addiction. And we can become addicted to anything: food, sex, alcohol, drugs, shopping. There's a myriad of, like Venus, there's like a million ways to become addicted to the substance or to the desire of possessing that good feeling. And what I've come to understand is that it's really this reaching for the feeling of God, feeling of connection, for knowing source on such a deep level that abiding calm that you're talking about, that abiding contentment, is our experience. And we have this initial moment where the mind says, oh, this is it. It, like when you fall in love, when you're first falling in love, like this is it. And then that converts to, I gotta have this all the time. And if this person doesn't exclusively give me all of their love and attention, I will kill you. And it's like, wait a second. And then the relationship turns from love to hatred, because neither person wants to be possessed of that energy. Or the substance turns from a good feeling to an addiction that ultimately can kill. And there's a term in recovery, in early recovery, that's called the pink cloud. And it's the point at which, in sobriety or in recovery, where you're no longer addicted to the substance, you're free from the mental obsession to use, and you actually are experiencing contact with grace, with source, with this God-abiding divine spirit that's moving your life experience towards wholeness. And it's euphoric in this ultimately life-changing way, because it opens up a gateway to which you can rest in knowing that God is carrying you towards the work that is your work to do. And it often doesn't last, but it's lasts long enough for someone to get rooted in sobriety towards changing their life, or rooted in a new way of living. If the addiction was food, or if it was related to a relationship, it's like that pink cloud effect is spirit coming in and guiding one towards their own healing. And I just feel like Neptune square Venus is essentially the pink cloud. It can be that catalyzing shift the square to where this thing of commodifying love, sex, beauty, substances no longer works, and we are moved by grace towards a new life, towards some opening in our own being to where we can actually engage in the work of living in the present moment and following, like what's right in front of me one day at a time. And I just feel like that's such a powerful place to be. So
That's really beautiful. I appreciate that thought about the pink cloud. And being that we're just in the beginning of this retrograde journey, and this Neptune Venus is so tight, and at the end of this retrograde, when Venus returns to where it was when it began retro, it will square Venus for the last time. It is meaningful to kind of look at what is opening up right now, like what teachings, what insights, what spiritual revelations. And I think a big part of like what I heard you speaking about the pink cloud, I can imagine that there's a secondary phase where it gets really hard.
yeah,
Right? It's like, and I can just identify this in my life in all aspects. Where it's like whenever I realize an addictive tendency and I really come to terms with it, the immediate effect is like this incredible freedom and liberation. I can feel like that God's grace is in a way like replacing that dependency, but then it's like life gets hard. That's where I think the rewiring of the mind and the devotion becomes so crucial, because we're learning to reference what is meaningful to replace the patterning of referencing what's meaningless.
and it's all about the thinking. It's all about rewiring the thinking and like becoming attuned in that way.
My legs are slowly splitting. I'm gonna fall. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Thanks for joining me, Michelle. Enjoy doing these videos with you.
Thank you.
You can push the button as I'm falling.